He's getting a close-up on your tie with the active.
Oh.
Actually, if you might want to say that, do you always wear an Act 2 tie?
No, not always.
You always wear a union-made tie?
Yes. I have a fight with my wife about that because there are some ties that don't have the label, only because the label fell off.
Okay, tell us about what it's like working in a factory where you don't have control.
Well, we have very little to say about whatever the employer says. We have to do whatever he says. But things weren't quite as bad in my shop as there were in some of the other shops. But the conditions of work were always bad. The heat, the fog that you had to work in, the water, the dirt that you had to work in. But there was quite a difference once we formed the union and I became the shop chairman. I used to get a kick out of sitting down with the employer and submitting my grievances to him. But we got along pretty well. Of course, we had some arguments with some of the workers that didn't want to join the first year. And I used to have some real violent arguments with people. I remember one guy said, he's going to hit me. I said, you hit me, boy, you're going to hit the union. You can't do that. And but there was quite a difference in the way we were treated by the employer once the union became the collective bargaining agency.
Now, Judy, who's having to get all of this stuff in a short period of time, says that she wants you to tell us again why you came to that convention in '34 and how you got there.
I came to my first convention in August of 1934, having been an activist person in the Dyers Union. I was a volunteer organizer. When we formed the union, I became the shop chairman in my plant, and I remember attending classes with Mark Starr and Joel Seidman from University of Chicago. They taught us how to run a meeting. They taught us something about the history of unions. They taught us something about how you put a contract together, how you have a shop steward system. And so I became an activist person. I learned how to type with 2 fingers. I learned how to cut a stencil, how to put a newsletter together. In those days, we used to get 10 cents out of every dollar that we collected in dues for the shop chairman. Well, I would take my 10 cents. We had around 280 members. I would get $28. I would buy mimeograph paper, and I would put out a newsletter in my shop. So I became very active in the union. And so when the union was selecting delegates, I was elected as a delegate to go to this convention. In fact, at that '34 convention, I roomed with George Baldanzi, the then president of the Dyers Federation, which had been formed just that April. That April, the 6 local unions that formed the Dyers Union in a strike in '33 formed a federation, and I was very active in that federation. In fact, I was involved in some local strikes in New Jersey. We had a strike in North Bergen, New Jersey, so that I was an activist type of a person. And so I was elected as a delegate. And we went to this convention. We stayed at the Hotel Woodstock. I roomed with George Baldanzi. We had 2 beds. It was a big room. If I recall correctly, I make mention of this because of my experience with Jack Rubenstein, who woke us up around 11:30 at night. We had already gone to bed, and we had quite a conversation. But I don't know whether that answers your question about how I got to be a delegate to the convention.
I guess it does. It does. Let me just ask you one other thing. Did you spend any time? Was it all formal meetings, or was there ever a caucus where the Southern delegation sat down with a group of people and?
Oh yes.
Could you describe that to us?
Well, I don't recall, but I'm sure that we met with a lot of different delegates in a lot of different rooms at night, but I don't have specific in my mind who we met with.
Talk about the music at the convention.
Music? God, I don't remember. I just don't remember whether we had any music. It's a funny, I would remember it if there was music there, because I love to sing. I don't remember that we had any music at that convention. As we did once we formed the CIO, we always had music at convention.
Could you talk about the role of Norman Thomas at that convention?
Well, I think he spoke at that convention. Norman Thomas, I believe, spoke at that convention, and he was very, very impressive. In fact, it's interesting that we were a more militant union. As I recall, at that 34 convention, we were talking about the importance of political action. We were talking about the need for more of a Labor Party idea at that convention.
Now, that was held against the Union in the South by a lot of newspapers.
I don't recall that. George, I don't recall that because if you're talking about the fact that we come out that we were interested in a Labor Party and that we had Norman Thomas, God, we certainly appreciated the support of Norman Thomas, and we liked the idea that we needed a Labor Party. I felt that way, felt strongly that we needed a Labor Party in those days. We need it now.
Okay.
I do have one more question.
Okay.
So, having attended the convention and meeting these Southern workers, and in your answer, maybe you could mention that. Did it change your attitude? Did it change your idea or your image of the Southern worker? What happened?
It did. It made me...
Start with a full sentence, please.
The impression that I got from the strikers in the South was that we needed a strong union. They impressed me as being genuinely interested in a better life for their families, for themselves, and for the union movement. Yes, they affected me spiritually and idealistically, ideologically, that we needed a strong labor movement to counteract the viciousness of the employer's power structure against the working people.
Okay.
And by the way, when I talked about a Labor Party, I said I think we need the kind of a political organization that they have in the Western European countries and that they have in Canada, like the Socialist New Democratic Party. I'm for that strongly. We ought to do something like that in this country.
Okay. Good. Okay, Jamie, we're going to break from this setup then.
Okay, let me just grab a few
Okay, this will
cutaways
take
here.
us just a moment.
When you're grabbing the cutaways, I guess I have this image. I just have this image of one of the Southern workers standing up there and explaining to the whole group, in detail what was going on back home and asking them to call a strike. They did. You had a vote for a general strike.
Oh yeah, sure, there was a vote.
Oh.
Of course there was a vote for a general strike. That was a decision made by the convention. There was a resolution. There was
Start again.
Go ahead.
there was a resolution introduced.
You want to speak?
There was a resolution that was introduced after a report was made on what's happening in the South by the leadership of the union at the time, by the rank and file people, by the officers of the different local unions. And it was as a result of all that discussion that this resolution was introduced and it was passed. I don't think anybody was against it.
And describe Gorman as a person.
I like Gorman. He was a good person. He was an able guy. So was Tom McMahon. They were good people, but they were ineffective. They didn't have, they just didn't have the support of the AFL in those days. And that's, people are affected as they come across to others on the basis of the support they're given. And they weren't given any support. But I think that they were both good men.
Why do you think that the AFL in general did not support the textile strike?
Well, in those days, the AFL was more concerned with craft unionism. And here, the textile industry was an industrial society. It was made up of industrial workers. And we believed that all the workers should belong to one union. But there wasn't any genuine interest on the part of the leadership of the AFL at that time in organizing industrial workers.
Good.
One more question. The southern strikers that you met at the convention, and I imagine, was this the first time for them, you think, that they were out on strike? Talk about their activism. Was it a new activism, or was it?
I would say that over the years, in the 20s, there were sporadic strikes in 28 and 29 and 30 and 31. There were constant strikes that were beaten. They were always beaten. And when the NRA came out, and you had that Section 7A that says the workers have the right to organize, it gave them a new lift. But they had been out on strike before. They were sporadic strikes, but they were never strongly organized, as they were in Alabama. And it was in Alabama where the first strike took place before the general strike.
Now, Julio, you had a question?
Well, I was wondering, so if now, 50, 60 years later, you think the labor movement has succeeded on setting a better life for the labor, or not, or was defeated?
I would say today, to the question, what has been the effect of unionism all through these years? I would say that the standard of living of the workers in the textile industry, union and non-union, is much better because of the sacrifices that were made by those people back in 1934. Yes, the workers' conditions are much better, and they're better because there was a strong union movement that brought about these standards. To that extent, the northern workers were very helpful to the southern workers, including those that never joined the union, but especially were helped by the workers that formed unions in the South and are still in existence. There are many, many local unions still in existence today from that strike in 1934.
Good. That's fine. Okay, we'll break. Excellent.
Okay.
That is dorm room. And guess what we had for breakfast? Toast. And then we stayed for lunch, and guess what we had for lunch? Toast. George was a self-help worker. He worked his way through Carolina, scrubbing windows.
Beautiful.
And that's what he lived on, toast.
Means I was cheap.
You told me that he helped. You told me he helped form a union.
He did. He sure did.
Tell us about that.
Well, George was a window washer, and he was a self-help student, so he organized all the self-help students. And the fascinating thing is, guess who came to the first meeting? The president of the university, against whom he was organizing. And that was Frank Porter Graham, and Graham said, I really am very happy that you people have organized. I think it's a good thing because you're going to let me know what your grievances are, and you're going to give me some information that I don't ordinarily get. Congratulations, and I'll do everything I can to work with you.
That's beautiful.
And George was the organizer.
And Don, you were reporting that for the Tar Heel?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, front page news.
No, Don,
Sure, I got all the copies of the Daily Tar Heel.
Don was the editor of the paper.
Yeah.
That's remarkable to tell us that you've got all these materials from your history with the Textile Workers Union of America. I think we ought to have that in our archives
Well, archives where? Here?
in Wisconsin.
In Wisconsin.
Okay, gentlemen, we're ready to go.
I'd like to give him a little more key line.
Sure.
All right, so
Rolling.
ask Don what effect he thinks the 34 strike had on the activities when you came down to be an organizer. And Don, then you say, well, that was in X, what the year it was and what you did, and the attitudes that were left with. And then you tell them what you think. Okay? Ready to go?
We're rolling.
Okay.
Don, what was your impression when you worked for our union, the Textile Workers Union of America, between 39 and 49? What was the impact of the 34 strike, that very famous strike of 400,000 textile workers?
Well, I began working with the Textile Workers Union, CIO, in the summer of 1939. My place of work was first in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and in Greenville. I think the 34 strike had two main impacts. First of all, it did furnish some of the leadership for the Textile Workers Union CIO. The state director with whom I worked, Paul Christopher, had gotten his training as a union leader really in that strike, and H.D. Red Lisk had also been very prominent in that episode. Moreover, when it came to organizing people in communities like Gaffney, some of the most prominent leaders of the union in that town had really gotten insights on the importance of labor organization by being in that 34 strike, which incidentally was only 5 years before I started trying to organize for the Textile Workers Union. So sometimes the experiences of the 34 strike had helped build local leadership too for the union movement. But on the whole, the 1934 strike had a very disastrous impact on efforts to organize in Spartanburg and Greenville, South Carolina, and in other towns where I was making an effort. Even in Gaffney, South Carolina. Typically, what a worker would say is, they had gone out on the 34 strike and they didn't get nothing, as they said. Many of them...
Just a moment.
We'll wait till 11:01.
Start with the bad things.
Okay. But on the whole, the result of the 34 strike was disastrous for our efforts to organize workers in Spartanburg, South Carolina, Greenville, and Gaffney. Typically what a worker would say is, oh, they had gone out in 1934, they had participated in the 34 strike, but they didn't get nothing, as they would say, and that the union had let them down, and that therefore they didn't want to have anything to do with joining a union again. We'd, of course, mention that that was the UTW, AFL, and this is the Textile Workers Union CIO, and it's a new and powerful union that had made all kinds of success in the mass production industries, but that didn't make much difference. I think, on the whole...
Didn't the employers also propagandize the workers to get them to believe the rumors they were spreading that unions ran away with your dues money, etc., etc.? Didn't they put the unions in a bad light? What was the role of the employers when you were trying to organize? When they referred to the 34 strike?
Well, I didn't run into any particular references by employers to the 34th strike. Here was the main problem, that as a result of that strike, a lot of textile workers had lost their jobs. Textile workers who had participated in the strike had been blacklisted. And what I really think the story was is that the textile workers in unorganized mills who were really afraid of losing their jobs used the 1934 strike as an excuse for not joining the union. But in Greenville and in Spartanburg, South Carolina, the strike didn't help us at all. It was very adverse to trying to get new organization. They felt that they had joined the union, had participated in a strike, and that nothing had come of it. Incidentally, even the workers who would say that they didn't get anything out of the 34 strike, they would go into raptures on their activity during the strike. That was a big occasion for them, occasion when they had asserted their independence and their dignity, and they would tell you all of the courageous and exciting things that they individually had done during the strike, but don't ask them to join again.
Now, could either or both of you talk about the effect of why was it different with the New Deal and Roosevelt and so on, their reaction in 34 and in 38, 39? What did you have that you didn't have in 34?
Well,
this is leading up to the
yes.
National Labor Relations Board and so forth.
Yes. Well, I think one of the big things that made a difference with Roosevelt was the organization of the CIO. Because when the CIO organized in 1935 and in just a matter of a few years had brought all the mass production industries except for Ford under collective bargaining contract, and when the CIO had established political action committees, that Roosevelt recognized the tremendous power which potentially organized labor could play in elections in the country. And I think that had something to do with his more friendly attitude, because actually, if you exaggerate a little bit, what Roosevelt did was he made a winning combination of workers, farmers, who he took away from the Republican Party, and the few black people in the country which were voting at that time. And organized labor was one of the crucial elements in that coalition, which was successful in electing him 4 times.
I can add to that the impact of the formation of the political movement of labor by forming Labor's Nonpartisan League, where they set up statewide organizations and county organizations all over the country. And it played a major role in helping re-elect Roosevelt in 1936.
Now, could you talk about your what happened to you? Can you describe? I want to show that the violence of 34 was not isolated; that it continued. So maybe you want to say that there was a lot of violence in 34, 15 killed and so forth. And it didn't stop with just 34, and then Don will tell about what happened to him in 39.
In that strike in 34, there was a lot of violence provoked by management, provoked by the use of detective agencies and spies, and even used by the police, like Governor Talmadge in Georgia, and the viciousness of the administration in attacking the rights of the workers. But that continued. It didn't just go on in the 34 strike. That continued right through the 30s and right through the 40s, because the Southern employers just didn't want to see their workers organized. They didn't believe in workplace democracy. They didn't feel that workers needed a labor organization to protect them. that individuals were free to come in and talk to the employer, and they knew how ridiculous that was.
Well, Saul, I would say, I was the victim of violence about 8 times. But since you asked about 1939, in Gaffney, South Carolina, where we were trying to organize and did finally get under collective bargaining contract, the 4 Hamrick mills. Well, I was beat up at the Hamrick mill gate when I was distributing literature. I accompanied a member of the United States Labor Department to the Alma mills to make an investigation when a car drove up in front of us and another car drove up behind us, and then the car in front of us stopped and the car behind us stopped. A huge mob of anti-union workers at the Alma mill surrounded us. We were stopped right in front of the porch of one of the company houses. A person came out with a shotgun and leveled it at my head. This type of episode took place for other people too. For instance, William Spencer, who is with the National Labor Relations Board, was molested when he went into Gaffney to make an investigation for workers who had been discharged for union activity. And when we were trying to contact workers in the Alma mill, there was a machine gun right up over the front door of the factory, comparable to the kind of machine guns that had been mounted on the roof of mills during the 34 strike in the South.
Let me just add, since I was in a strike, conducting a strike in 36 in Derby, Connecticut, we had gangster elements come in and break up our picket lines. In fact, there was a bombing of a car and they tried to blame the union for it. And fortunately, their charges didn't get them anywhere. But I still recall vividly, and one example, in 1937, when the president of our union, Emil Reevy, and the director of the synthetic yarn division in our union went and met with the president of the American Viscose Corporation that employed 15,000 workers. And when Herb Payne and Emil Reevy learned that the company was employing spies, the two of them went to Philadelphia to meet with the owner, who happened to be a Quaker. He was a member of the American Friends Service Committee. He was a man of peace. And he said to them, "I don't believe it." He said, "Yes, you are employing spies and strike-breaking agencies in all of your mills." He says, "Let me look into it." And he said, "You come back and see me in a week." Within that 1 week, in every one of the local unions in the American Viscose Company, in Meadville, in Marcus Hook, in Lewistown, in Front Royal, in Parkersburg, and in all the locations, there was either a president missing. In one location, a business agent was missing. In one other location, another officer was missing. But in every single local union, within that 1 week, these people were gone. They were missing. We got recognition from the American Viscose Company. We worked out a collective bargaining agreement affecting 15,000 workers. And do you know, until that company sold its operation to FMC Corporation, we never had a strike. It's a record that was dramatized by Herb Payne in the National Planning Association.